So let me start with an experiment. A very simple one, actually. Back in the 1600s, there was a scientist named Jean-Baptiste van Helmont, and he did something brilliant. He took a willow tree, just a little sapling, about 5 pounds. He put it in a pot of soil. He weighed the soil carefully, and he weighed the tree. Then he watered it and waited. For 5 years, he took care of this tree, watering it regularly. And after 5 years, he weighed the tree again. It had grown to about 169 pounds. That's an increase of about 164 pounds of mass. Now here's the key part. He also weighed the soil. And you know what? The soil had barely changed. It lost only about 2 ounces. 2 ounces. And yet the tree gained 164 pounds. So where did it come from? Van Helmont concluded, and this was a radical idea at the time, that the mass came from water. He thought the tree was basically made of water, but that's not quite right either. That's part of the picture, but not the whole picture. It took a couple more centuries for science to really figure this out. Today, we know the answer, and it's elegant. It's actually very satisfying once you really grasp it. The tree is not growing from the ground. The tree is growing from the air. Now, I can see you're skeptical. That sounds crazy. How does a tree grow from the air? Well, let me explain, and I want you to really pay attention to this, because this is where it gets interesting from a physics perspective. Plants have this process called photosynthesis. You've probably heard the word. But I want you to think about what it actually does mechanically from a physics standpoint. Here's what happens. The leaves of a tree absorb light, visible light from the sun. That's energy, right? Electromagnetic energy hitting those leaves. At the same time, the roots absorb water from the soil. And here's the crucial part. The leaves absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Now, carbon dioxide is a gas. It's literally in the air. And it's everywhere. Every time you breathe out, you're releasing carbon dioxide. It's in the atmosphere at concentrations that we measure in parts per million. And the tree's leaves pull this gas in through tiny little pores called stomata, okay? Think of them as the tree's nostrils if you want. So now the tree has 3 things: light energy, water, and carbon dioxide. And inside the cells of the leaf, specifically in structures called chloroplasts, these amazing little factories, a chemical reaction happens. The light energy drives a reaction where the carbon dioxide and water molecules are broken apart and recombined, and the product is glucose, a sugar. But here's what's important. Glucose is an organic compound that contains carbon atoms. It's a solid. So think about what just happened. You took a gas, carbon dioxide, and you turned it into a solid with the help of light energy. The carbon dioxide is now locked up in these sugar molecules. That's the key. The mass of the tree is primarily carbon, and that carbon came from the air. Let me give you some numbers, because I think this makes it more concrete. A dry tree, and when I say dry, I mean after you've removed all the water, is about 50% carbon by weight. The other 50% is oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, and trace minerals. But that 50% carbon, that all came from the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Think about that for a moment. You have a forest, and that forest is basically made of air, of gaseous air that's been captured and transformed into solid matter through the process of photosynthesis. That's remarkable. Now, what happens next? The tree doesn't just make this glucose and sit around. The glucose is used in several ways. First, the plant uses some of it immediately for energy, to power its own cellular processes. That's called respiration. The plant breaks down some of the glucose to get energy, just like we do when we eat food. And when the plant respires, it releases carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. But here's the thing. It doesn't release all of it back. It only uses some. The rest of the glucose is used for growth and structure. This is where biosynthesis comes in. The glucose is transformed into more complex compounds. Some of it becomes cellulose, which is the structural component of plant cell walls. Some becomes lignin, which is even more complex and gives wood its strength and rigidity. Some become starch, which the tree can store for later use. All of these compounds contain carbon that came from the air. As the tree grows, this process continues day after day, year after year. The leaves continue to pull carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. The light continues to power the reaction, and the tree continues to build more and more solid matter. The trunk grows thicker, the branches extend, the roots deepen. All of it, fundamentally, is captured atmospheric carbon dioxide combined with water and minerals from the soil. Now, here's something else that's worth thinking about. The soil. It does contribute to the tree's growth, but not in the way most people think. The soil provides water, yes, but it also provides nutrients. The tree needs nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and various other elements for healthy growth. These come from the soil. But here's the thing. These nutrients make up only a tiny fraction of the tree's total mass. The vast majority of the mass is carbon, and that carbon is from the air. So if you want to understand why a forest is so important for climate, this is part of the reason. A mature tree, let's say an oak or a pine, can absorb about half a ton of carbon dioxide equivalent in a single year. That's carbon dioxide that's being pulled out of the atmosphere and locked up in solid wood. Over the lifetime of the tree, which could be hundreds of years, that's an enormous amount of carbon sequestered. That's why scientists talk about forests as carbon sinks. They're not sinks in the sense of drains, they're sinks in the sense that they're reservoirs. They're holding carbon that would otherwise be in the atmosphere in the form of CO2, and they're holding it in solid form, in wood, in leaves, in roots. Now, from a physics perspective, what we're really talking about here is energy transformation. The sun's energy is being captured by chlorophyll molecules in plant cells and being converted into chemical energy stored in the bonds of organic compounds. That's the fundamental process. The light comes in, and it powers the breaking apart of molecular bonds and the forming of new ones. Photosynthesis is, in essence, a nanoscale solar cell. Every leaf is a tiny solar panel, and it's powered entirely by the sun. And when you think about it that way, you start to see that all life on Earth is ultimately powered by the sun. Plants capture solar energy and convert it to chemical energy. Animals eat the plants and use that chemical energy. We burn fossil fuels, which are ancient plants that captured solar energy millions of years ago, and we're releasing that energy now. It all traces back to photosynthesis. So back to our original question. Where do trees grow from? The answer is simple once you understand it. They grow from the air. The air is their primary source of mass. The ground provides the platform, the water, and the nutrients. But the actual substance of the tree, the stuff it's made of, is captured carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. This is a beautiful example of something I always try to emphasize when teaching physics. The universe operates according to principles that are often not intuitive. You can't just look at something and assume you understand it. You have to dig deeper. You have to do experiments. You have to measure things. And when you do, you often find that the answer is stranger and more interesting than what your intuition told you. Van Helmont did that. He measured. He found that the soil barely changed, and that forced him to look for another explanation. And eventually, science figured out that the explanation was photosynthesis, a process that converts air into matter, a process that powers essentially all of life on Earth. Now, I want you to really sit with this idea for a moment. Think about a forest. Think about all those trees towering above you, massive trunks and branches. All of that was pulled from the air. That carbon dioxide that your friends and family are breathing out right now, that's being captured by plants. It's being incorporated into leaves and stems and roots. It's becoming matter. And when you think about climate change, when you think about rising CO2 levels in the atmosphere, this is why it matters. Because that CO2 is not just an abstract gas. It's not just a number in a scientific paper. That CO2 is energy in a very real sense. It's carbon that's not being locked up in forests and plants. It's staying in the atmosphere, trapping heat, warming the planet. But conversely, this is also why reforestation and forest conservation are so important. Because if you plant trees, if you restore forests, you're literally pulling carbon out of the air and turning it into solid matter. It's a direct, tangible action. And it's powered by the sun, by photosynthesis, by this process that's been running on Earth for over 2 billion years. So the next time someone tells you that a tree grows from the ground, you can tell them, no, they don't. They grow from the air. And if you understand that, if you really understand the mechanism behind it, you've learned something fundamental about how the world works.